Welcome to Beyond Imagination, the future of creative technology, presented by Technicolor Creative Studios. I'm your host, Isabelle du Plessis, Global PR Director across The Mill, MPC, Mikko's Animation, and Technicolor Games. In this special edition podcast season, we'll be talking to leading figures across the creative technology space about evolving trends that are shaping the future of filmmaking, gaming, advertising, animation, innovation, and talent. We couldn't have a creative technology festival without talking about the metaverse. But some sectors are embracing the concept far more than others. In today's innovation-focused podcast, I'm chatting with a series of pioneers within the metaverse space about music and entertainment in the metaverse and the future of virtual events. I'm joined by Toa Dunn, head of Riot Games Music, Jared Kennedy, COO of Wave, and Mikko Martikainen, technical director at The Mill, to explore this emerging concept more. Thank you all for joining me on the podcast. Let's kick off with a round of introductions. So I will go around the proverbial room, and could you each just tell me a bit about yourself, your background, and perhaps give some examples of recent projects you've worked on in the sort of interactive and immersive space. Toa, why don't we kick off with you?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Toa Dunn, head of Riot Games Music. And so I lead our music initiative that stretches across both esports, the games, as well as entertainment. Some of our recent projects include Pentakill, KDA, as well as our kind of esports opening ceremonies and anthems.
Amazing. And Jared, what about you?
Hi, I'm Jared Kennedy. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Wave XR. And what we do is we create virtual concert experiences. And a most recent concert we did was one with Justin Bieber, which took place back in November and was really a lot of fun. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, Jared. And Mikko.
Hi, I'm Mikko Martikainen, and I'm the Technical Art Director at the Mill Experience Department. I think one of the biggest projects recently was with both of these guys' companies, the Pentakill one, which was a really great experience for us to do.
Well, we'll be diving into that Pentakill project a little more later. But first of all, let's define what we actually mean by the metaverse. I'm sure you could ask 10 different people and they'll give you 10 different answers. So I'd be curious to know how each of you sort of define the metaverse. Jared, why don't we kick off with you?
I think the metaverse it's a really tricky word. And you're right. People are thinking about lots of definitions as to what it means. For me, it's shared virtual space first and foremost. And you might say, well, that sounds like the internet. I have shared virtual space on TikTok or on Facebook, other places. I think with the metaverse, one, it's more visual and more interactive. You have a sense of presence with other people in a virtual space. And two, it's the ability to move between spaces and keep your identity. And so we're not quite there. Right now, there are a series of metaverses. Like, if you look at Fortnite's a great example of a space that's emerging from the gaming side, all in Unreal Engine. It started out as a game, and now it's becoming a shared space where you can be social. There are other metaverses like Roblox. And over time, the hope and the plan is that these metaverses will start to blend together, and Web3 technology will likely enable a lot of that. And I think once that happens, it will start to look like the metaverses that we talk about in science fiction. We're still in the early days of it, with avatar technology coming online, game engine technology developing at a rapid pace. And so I think everyone's looking around the corner and saying, wow, where is this going to be in 10 years' time? And what is it going to mean to have an identity in this virtual space?
It really does feel like we're at that perfect sort of convergence of the many technologies needed to power this concept coming together. And, you mentioned game engines really evolving at a rapid pace. Toa, that's a background that you've come from. It's funny because the concept of the metaverse, to me, you talked about this kind of shared virtual space. It feels like that's really the world the gaming space has been in for years, and that this is potentially just an evolution of gaming. Toa, what do you think about that?
Yeah, right. So I think for video games, games have existed for quite a while, and it's been a place for, players to kind of, have social experiences as well as just kind of have entertainment, for example, right? And playing video games and it being kind of a digital platform, a place that you can kind of, whether it's more story-driven experiences, or if it's action-packed, kind of more like sports experiences, very competitive. So video games have been kind of one aspect of it, and I think Jared hit it right on the head. Is it's definitely an evolving space now. We're seeing technology really evolve. It's becoming more open source, right? And people starting to have identities and figure out how do they want to exist in these spaces. And then plus, like what he also mentioned, right? It's how do we bring the things that we love into these spaces, and what's that experience like? But again, it's still really early, the technology, but it's moving at a very rapid pace. I think there's a lot of excitement, a lot of energy behind that. And so at least my opinion is, as far as like, where we kind of overlap is video games and music and kind of entertainment, which is also our way of, it's not necessarily we're creating what we believe to be the metaverse. I think it's just what we think is, what is the next step in kind of entertainment and music? Like, how do people want to experience music? Is that the metaverse? It's probably a slice of it, right? But I think it's less about the definition. I think over time, people will experience things that's going to continue to evolve, and that will be the metaverse at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the concept of, it's a slice of it. I think that really hits the nail on the head. There's a lot of appetite to define the metaverse, be in the metaverse, represent yourself in the metaverse. And actually, like you said, Jarrett, we're not quite there yet. But, all of these experiences and technologies represent a slice of it and a stepping stone to get us there. Mikko, you work on the technical and creative side of developing the experiences. What are your thoughts on the rising concept of the metaverse and what it means to your profession?
Well, it's a great opportunity, I think, as a content creator, because it in a way, it's what we've been doing, for the past, 20, 30 years in terms of kind of creating 3D worlds, but mainly those have been so far in a linear space, linear content for films and advertising and TV shows. But I think with the game engines coming forward, the opportunity to give agency to the user and the kind of audience is, well, it is pretty mind-blowing. I mean, in a way, it feels like, the term metaverse just came up, I don't know, like in the past year or so, but, like the VR headsets, that brought in a lot of kind of explorations in narrative storytelling. And I think, now with the metaverse, where we kind of think of it as a more, maybe, not just, or kind of like depending on how you're going to access the metaverse, be a headset or a browser, but just the fact that it's interactive, I think from a kind of storyteller and a kind of person who kind of world building perspective, it's incredibly exciting. And I think just kind of touching on the kind of Web3 terminology, I think I can't remember. I think it was Tony Parisi from Unity who kind of said that he thinks that the metaverse is already. I think the quote was something like, "The metaverse is already here. At the moment, the UI is 2D," and I think that's pretty kind of well put, because I think we connect with people through the internet, and I think it's just the metaverse is probably just a like an evolution of that interface to that worldwide connecting fabric.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the term metaverse really, although it's been popularized very recently, I mean, it originated in Neil Stephenson's 1992 science fiction novel Snow Crash. So now, 30 years later, in 2022, why do you think now the term has become so popular in modern day vernacular and it's what everyone is talking about?
For me, it's. I think. I mean, COVID had probably quite a lot to do with that. Even though it took it wasn't until the kind of, I guess, well, hopefully now the ending kind of times of the COVID pandemic. But I think the fact that people were home a lot, people had to connect virtually or digitally with Zooms. It just kind of turbocharged the. Kind of the thinking behind how we can make these interactions a bit more interesting. And all the technology kind of around it, the game engines, Fortnite and all that stuff obviously helped.
The gaming industry has experienced such a boom recently, and especially during the pandemic. I mean, I still can't get my hands on a PlayStation 5, and I do remember not being able to get my hands on a Nintendo Switch for many, many months in 2020. And perhaps that sense of fostering culture in online community is something that, society is very receptive to now, because we've been living in isolation for a few years. And so I think there's been a cultural shift potentially in the adoption of this kind of online technology and gaming technology, and the barrier of entry for a lot of these things has been lowered to people. So it now all seems a lot more accessible.
I think that's right. I think it's more accessible. I also think that with every new generation that comes online, it's more native. And we saw this in gaming, where it was weird for some to watch other people play video games. That was something that people found strange 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And now it is very commonplace, and people make their entire careers out of playing games online, essentially performing in a way. And I think that we saw the same thing with esports, actually, where playing games as, professionally seemed strange. And we're like, wait, people watch other people play these games professionally. And I think with the idea of virtual identity, virtual performance, virtual creation, where your primary identity is an online identity, is something that is very strange, to some, because it's not the place that we've come from, looking back, decades into the past. But for someone born in this century or born in this decade, it's completely normalized. You spend a lot of time hanging out with your friends on Discord. You spend a lot of time hanging out with your friends in Roblox or Fortnite or in Valorant or League of Legends. And these are formative experiences that will shape how you think about social connection going forward. And so with every generation that comes online, it's just more standard. And I think that also helps. So you've got a couple of different tailwinds. One is the technology, which continues to evolve, and it's getting easier and better. And then two, the socialization around what it means to have a virtual experience and have a virtual connection is getting normalized.
Yeah, and I think, to kind of add on to that, right? Like as you just look over time and the difference between the generations, right? I remember as a child, the family kind of meeting and watching TV on certain evenings. And so you got an hour or two, but you look kind of now where how much time do people actually spend on screen, which can be your phone, can be your TV, can be your computer now. And you look at kind of what social media is, right? Like with Twitter, like people have had an online presence for quite a time. I think, the pandemic was kind of a catalyst for people to kind of amplify that, right? Become, needing more ways to, whether through social media, whether through video games, to kind of connect with others. And so you're seeing more and more time spent in, through virtual or digital or through technology to connect with others. And so I think it's a continuing trend, right? And I think a lot of the terms, we need to find labels, right? A lot of people need to kind of find those words or those labels to kind of identify what that is. But kind of the reality of it is it's just been happening. People have been playing games for quite a while. And it, kind of exploded with the pandemic. People have been using social media for quite a while. I think even on whether it's Twitter or Instagram, not everybody always used a photo of themselves. And there's kind of what they call a PFP movement that's happened over the past year where, whether it's with Bored Ape and things like that, where people want to identify with, maybe it's a character or something like that. So again, leaning into that, like what is your identity or how do you exist kind of in the virtual space or online, I think is something that's been progressively happening.
I'm curious, Toa, I see that obviously you're head of Riot Games music, and from what we've seen in early stage metaverse experiences, that the music industry is really one that has embraced this concept and is blending really well with the world of gaming. Everyone talks about Travis Scott's Fortnite concert sort of being one of the first really big hitters. Why is it that Riot specifically decided to move into the music space?
I mean, we've been in, I guess if you want to call it, the music space for quite a while. We've grown an internal music production team, so kind of all the way from songwriting to production to even performance, marketing, and distribution of our music, right? And so, I mean, Jared and I have worked quite a while over here at Riot when we were working on big esports events. I mean, even back in 2014, we were collaborating with Imagine Dragons and throwing big, sold out arena events, at the, our opening ceremonies. And this was back in 2014, in front of, I mean, back then, I want to say it must have been about 60 million people or so. I want to guess, all the way up to, 100 plus million, as recent as 2018, I think is when we hit that number. So we've been kind of in the music space for a while. But for us, it's a natural place for us to be. Like, we love music. Our players love music. And so we've really invested in developing what music can mean for kind of the overall game experience, for the esports experience, and just an overall entertainment experience. And, everything to developing, what are called virtual idols now. We have bands like KDA, right, which we launched in 2018. And, for us, it wasn't like, oh, we want to be in the virtual idol space. It was, we want to create a really cool experience, in collaboration with the game and esports. And, a lot of us were really passionate about kind of that pop and K-pop music. And so it was our expression of it. So we've kind of organically ended up here, and we've been doing it for a while. So it's been great to see, especially with the pandemic, because I think, for them, I know for me as a fan of music, miss concerts, right? Like, you weren't able to go to those big concerts and festivals, see your favorite artist and connect with them. But people still wanted those connections, right? And so they had to kind of defer to, technology as a way to kind of have some of those or supplement some of those kind of connections. And so I think video games were in a really great position. And I think, kind of other platforms, especially like Wave VR, were kind of like ahead of the game, where they were already developing that space of like, well, what is a music or digital experience like? And so I think for us, we were kind of already working to that. And I think that's why, Pentakill was like kind of a no-brainer. Even though we were already on our way to that, like it was a no-brainer for us to do that.
So you've touched on Pentakill. For those who don't know who Pentakill are, can you give a quick overview of Pentakill? Because it's a really interesting concept, and I wasn't aware of who Pentakill were before we developed this project.
Yeah, so Pentakill was really developed as a passion project by the music team, right? And so kind of think of it, it's a, in our game, we have, we have over 150 characters, champions, I believe now, we call them champions. And so we have what we call skins, which is kind of alternate fantasies or thematics to kind of express the different champions. And so as far back as in 2014, we got kind of compelled to want to express like kind of metal music. And so there was a band, so there was a group of character champions, about 5 of them, that had the same thematic skin, and it was a metal skin. And there was kind of this lore about how they were a band, as a 5. And so our team decided to say, well, what if they really were a band? What would that look like? And so instead of Riot Games making a metal album, we kind of, maybe similar to how you would think of Gorillaz, is maybe something that might feel familiar, right? Is Pentakill basically launched an album and released an album. So we started with like a single and then, released the full album 2 weeks later. And so this became kind of our first virtual band, was a metal band. And so Pentakill is a very kind of, it's a passion project, but we also have like a bunch of our players that are very passionate about Pentakill, and it just feels very League. And so we did their 3rd album recently, in which we worked with Jared as well as Mikko on the kind of how do we bring them to life? How do we bring this album to life in a way that, especially with new digital technology, what is a great way and a new way to do that for our players? And so, yeah, Pentakill's had 3 albums out now, and that's just really kind of been their journey so far.
Amazing. So, and just to be clear, Pentakill, it's League of Legends is the game that Pentakill was born from.
Yes, based off of champions from the game League of Legends.
Speaking of the Pentakill project, and Jared, we work very closely with you and the Wave team on this. What do you see the major benefits are, Jared, of virtual concerts? I mean, you've been working in this space for a while. You said you just did one with Justin Bieber. Obviously, we've just touched on the Pentakill project. You guys are making massive waves in this space. What do you think the opportunities are for virtual concerts, and are they here to stay?
I think they're absolutely here to stay. Virtual concerts are experiences that you can share with people all around the world. And so they're never going to replace traditional concerts, live in-person experiences. They're a different art form. And I think in the beginnings of a new art form, it tends to look like the art form from which it evolves. But over time, it becomes its own thing. And as we improve ways to give people a sense of presence and a sense of connection, and those are things that we work on every day, or a sense of interactivity, and we can talk about interactivity in the Pentakill show. We think that there will be opportunities to do things in a virtual space that just aren't possible in a physical space. And sometimes when we're talking to artists and we're talking to their creative teams, they say, "Oh, on tour, I always wanted to do this, but I couldn't do it because, the space wouldn't allow for it, or technically it was too challenging, or we couldn't get the effect that we wanted." And when you come into a virtual space, you're not really constrained by physics or really anything. It's just kind of what can you imagine, and then how can we render something like that in engine. And so we think it's a huge opportunity to allow people to experience music in a new way. And personally, my dream is to be in a place where an artist is going into the studio and is creating, and they're thinking about how they would express this virtually. I think that's when we've really arrived. And maybe some artists are doing that, because we do have virtual artists that are coming up online and starting to kind of stake their claim. And we're talking to some of them about doing some things, and they're just purely virtual artists, kind of similar to Pentakill, but not coming out of a game, but just coming out of someone's idea for how they want to express themselves. And I guess Gorillaz, to Toa's point, was one of the first to come out of a major label. And we're really excited about this because it's a new art form, it's a new craft, and there are things that you need to be great at in a virtual concert that maybe you don't need to be as good at in a traditional concert. For example, the interaction with the crowd is more one-to-one. It's not always one-to-one, but it's one to a few as opposed to one to many. So if you're at Crypto.com Arena or someplace else, or Madison Square Garden, and you're calling out to the crowd and they're calling back, that tends to be a kind of a one-to-many type of experience. And we think within virtual entertainment and virtual concerts, there's an opportunity to kind of bring the intimacy a little bit closer and allow you to have a slightly more engagement than you would in those bigger contexts. So we're really excited about the potential for where this goes over time.
It feels like there's a lot of creative opportunity there. And, Mikko, you've worked behind the scenes on a lot of this type of work, and you touched on the potential flexibility of storytelling narratives in these spaces. You worked specifically on the Pentakill project as well. Can you tell me a bit more about behind the scenes? What are some of the design considerations and creative considerations or challenges or flexibilities with developing virtual concerts?
Well, yeah, I think the biggest creative challenge is that because of the nature of the technology, you can do anything. So you kind of have to then start to kind of narrow it down. But I think, to me, it's like, the 90s, when I was a teenager, like it was, the heyday of music videos, which was kind of like I kind of almost see it as a precursor to this, when it was, you had huge budgets and kind of big narratives and kind of storytelling, and then that kind of went away. But now with virtual concerts and real-time engines, I think that is making a little bit of a comeback in a way, bigger, better, and more interactive. But yeah, so I think, especially with the Pentakill project, it wasn't easy to kind of come up with the narrative, but it was a lot easier because there was so much kind of lore from the game that we could tap into, and the kind of worlds and the visuals and all of that. So, it was a lot easier to kind of use that as the framework to build the story around. But we still, it's a very like a fantastical world where it happens, the concert. But we still, we use the, real stage designers to come up with, like a framework or, loose designs for the like initial arena for the band to appear in. So we wanted to still kind of, have some sort of a reality to base everything in the beginning too. And then, then it was just about coming up with a really cool story that follows the music and kind of executing it.
I love the idea of real stage designers coming together with virtual world builders to build something that's really an entirely new concept. so that it does feel grounded in the reality of watching a concert. But like you said, Jarrett, the kind of possibilities are endless in terms of what you can achieve, with the visuals.
Absolutely. And I think just on that point, the idea of grounding it in reality and grounding it in something that people understand and are familiar with, I think is really important at this particular stage of the development of the art form and the technology. But I also think that over time, that's going to change. So for example, when we did our show with John Legend, he does All of Me. He starts on a stage and then the stage kind of falls away and it gets a little bit more fantastical and a bit more three-dimensional. And I think that reference point to reality will become likely less important over time as the idea of spending time in these metaversal spaces, these shared virtual environments becomes more normalized.
Jared, could you possibly provide a couple of examples of the interactivity one might see in the Pentakill project or, say, the John Legend concert you just mentioned?
Sure. So in the Pentakill project, there were lots of different ways that you could interact with the show. One was you could show up on camera. So we had an integration where selected streamers and other members of the community could actually appear as treated video within the experience once they joined a faction or a team. And then those teams could compete to help Pentakill on their journey by voting on things or choosing what should happen or clicking really fast to kind of be the one who gets to be fired off at the enemy. And so it's just a lot of ways to bring people in to the experience and have them engage and feel like they have agency over what's happening on screen. And over time, as we move deeper into 3D experiences, you'll have even more ways to interact. So Wave actually started out doing VR shows exclusively before we moved to a world where we were doing streaming shows like Pentakill and Bieber. And in those shows, the primary way that you experience it is through a screen as opposed to in virtual reality, and you're interacting using your tapping on your phone screen or with your keyboard. But in virtual reality, you could do really interesting things where you could go on these basically like trips where you would have these really otherworldly experiences during the concert, or you could help bend the world and reality is actually changing around you and you're in control of that. So there's limitless possibilities for how we can interact. And one of the things we spend a lot of time on within our company from a design perspective is thinking about which interactions feel really good, what feels like it gives you a sense of connection and presence and agency, and trying to double down on those. So again, it's an emerging art form, it's an emerging discipline, because the artist also still wants to have some control, right? It's an interesting push and pull, because normally you go to a concert, the artist has his or her set list and they're gonna play through it and they're really in control of the experience. When you go into a Wave, you're still in control and you can lock the set list, that's fine. Sometimes people will allow the audience to choose, but because the audience has agency, you lose a little bit of the control of the show, right? Like a little bit. And in exchange for that, you get this back and forth, which can be really powerful and fun, but it's different and it's an evolution. And we love it. And it's really why we really work hard to make sure that Waves are live, because when Waves are live, like, so the artist is in a motion capture suit, they're moving one-to-one with how the avatar is moving. So they're really embodying the avatar with the essence of them. It's like, I am in the room with this particular individual, and they can react to anything that's happening with the audience. Anything that happens in engine that the audience makes happen, they can respond to, and it just creates a back and forth that we think is really special and distinctive within kind of the musical genre.
What do you think the main challenges are of being really the first people to invest in this space? Is it hard to get stakeholders on board or really sell this into consumers? Toa, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same that you would kind of experience in kind of like Blue Ocean, right? So a lot of this stuff just hasn't really been done before. A lot of discovery that's going on, and so there's a little bit more risk in that, right? It's not like in fact, we make kind of the joke that every experience that we do is a totally new one. We tend to never repeat anything, so we always have to learn, right? We always have to kind of figure out. We call it also building the plane in the air to an extent when you're in this space. So yeah, a lot of the typical talking with stakeholders and getting them on board of what we're trying to achieve and excited. So kind of all of those things, but I think specifically for our team and, at Riot and what we're trying to do, we do have a lot of excitement and a lot of buy-in of what we're trying to accomplish here. And I think there's a lot of interest in the space, and you're only seeing it grow. And so I think a lot of validation is now starting to happen in this space too, as you're starting to see some great executions. It's starting to become more tangible. And so I think there'll be some more kind of interesting and potentially larger bets in this space too, because I think it's for many, for kind of entertainment and music, I think it is the future. And so I think that's what we're trying to pave here.
Mikko, you do a lot of commercial work at the Mill. Are you seeing brands wanting to utilize this technology more and explore their footprint in the metaverse?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's funny. It's almost like every brief that comes in now has the term metaverse in it. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything metaversey about those projects, but yeah, I think it's just the hype and the kind of overall excitement about the possibilities. I think it really really kind of resonates with brands as well, and I think it's just going to increase in the coming years.
And of course, there are always going to be some critics out there and people who are worried that we'll spend the next few years in headsets and we're going to be sucked into a dystopian future where we no longer interact in the real world. What would you say to alleviate people's worries about the metaverse?
Well, me personally, I think, I don't think I would kind of approach it more from like what it enables us to do and how it opens up these experiences to so many more people that wouldn't normally be able to kind of attend concerts or see these things. I think it's just that like it democratizes these experiences to a much wider audience than it's currently possible.
I agree with that. I would add that going back to the comment that was made previously about the internet being the metaverse in 2D, the internet has its pros and its cons, and it's something that we have to work on, as a society every day to manage and to make sure that the tools are being used in the right way and for the greater good. But despite the fact that there have been some downsides to the introduction of the internet into, human society, I think it's been a tremendous gift overall. And I believe that these technologies, what the metaverse will ultimately come, has the potential to have a similar positive impact on how we connect, how we experience things, and how we create. And I'm personally really excited about that.
Yep, and I pretty much just agree kind of there, right? It's two sides of the coin there, right? Like especially when you get into kind of new technology, new experiences, there's some downside to it, right? As we kind of learn the technology, we as humans learn to engage with this thing called the internet, and the fact that it just opens all these doors, right? Like as far as accessibility becomes a thing. And I think that's kind of one of the big themes that technology has really hit lately is accessibility. And so we're just having to learn to deal and manage with all that accessibility. So, but I think over time we do develop that, and more of the positive really starts to ring out, and then everything just becomes better to an extent, right? As we kind of learn in the space.
Absolutely. I think the idea that this technology can be utilized to make so many experiences and even education accessible to wider and global audiences is really exciting. I'm just thinking, Jared, about John Legend or a Justin Bieber concert that previously, how many people could fit in that stadium versus how many people probably got to experience that on the Wave platform. And that can be extended to Fashion Week fashion shows and art galleries and all sorts of amazing things. So I think, as you guys say, we're not quite there yet. The building blocks are here, and there are very exciting things to come. So thank you all for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
If you're interested in exploring any of the ideas you heard today, please get in touch with the Technicolor Creative Studios team via any one of our studio websites or email beyondimagination@technicolor.com. Today's podcast was produced by Lime Studios, led by executive producer Becca Falborn. You can follow Lime Studios on all platforms at limestudios.tv. Thank you to all of our guests and to you for tuning in to Beyond Imagination.